Good morning everyone. We are again in series na to sa Genesis. And one of the things that we are going to discuss this morning is about some aspects of our journey as a Christian, no? The Christian faith, man God, is a journey, and the Bible describes us as pilgrims to this world, wherein we go through different stages or different challenges and the situations in our life until we reach the destinations. So this is also the same with Abraham. No, Abraham has a lot of things that he went through, and he is also traveling in sort of a spiritual journey sa iyang life. First, he was called out from his comfort zone in the land of Ur, and he was obeying God, and one of his journey is the obedience to the call of faith, wherein he was uprooted from his land, and then to a land that is quite, for him, it's uncertain because he doesn't know what's going to happen there. Next is that one of his journey is the trust in the promise that was given to him. No, as a man that is already old and could not possibly have an offspring because of the barrenness of Sarah, he was given a promise, and that promise was something that is so valuable for him. He trusted God in order to prolong or extend his bloodlines. Next, another journey is the blunder with Ismael, right? They misinterpreted the promise and do something else, and with that there was a blunder. And instead of following God, they shortcut their way into it. Then we have this sins of comfort. No, when he went to the land away from the land that he was living, he did that. He went there with his wife, and in so doing, made some calculated and blunders gid siya, sins that are trying to he was just trying to preserve himself and the comfort that he has. No, twice with Abimelech pagyod. No, then we have also the grace of God and its effect. Despite sa iyang mga mistakes, despite sa iyang mga sins, God still, according to his mercy and his goodness, blessed Abraham, and in fact supposed to be given punishment, but instead blessing was given. So that is something that is also quite true for most of us, for many of us. No, there are times that in our spiritual journey, daghan kay tag na encounter. We did some blunders, a lot of them, right? And we also have some shares of our sins, not just the sins of comfort, but also sins of mga darling sins na to, mga baby sins, just like Jacob. And in spite of all of that, we were given grace instead of due penalty for the things that we did. And with that backdrop, we go through another area or another stage of Abraham's life, which is the test of his faith. Okay, so Abraham in Genesis 22 has undergone the test that is one of the things that could either make or break his spiritual journey. So we divide this passage into 5. One is that the test. No, next is the faith, the intervention. Then after the intervention, God confirmed the promise, and then the preparation for this promise to be realized na gid siya. Now, testing of faith is something that all of us has to go through. I think all of us will agree with this, no? And there are times that for us, we don't want our faith to be tested. And there are two things that we need to avoid whenever there's a test of faith that will be happening to us. One of that attitude is the dismissive attitude. No, the idea ba nga man ko pinangga man ko sa Ginoo, I should not experience this. This should not happen to me. This should not happen to us. We dismiss this in kinabang the sense of entitlement nga because God loves us, He will not allow us to undergo this kind of trials, especially trials that really is something heavy for us. And this is, I believe, a product of the prosperity mindset. God's will is for you to prosper, to be healthy, to be successful, and there's no way for us to suffer and defeat and difficulty and so much hardship that that we should fail. Another attitude that we should avoid in undergoing the test of faith is the presumptive attitude. What is this? This is the kind of attitude that because we believe that we are a strong Christian, we should overcome it. Kana bang idea ba nga strong lagi ko, kaya lagi nako ni. So that is a very dangerous attitude, because it already it's somehow a product of our spiritual pride, that because we read the Bible regularly, we prayed regularly, we congregate with other people regularly, and we read theological books regularly. Whenever we have encountered faith, kaya ginatong overcome nato na siya. And there are a lot of examples that we see, not only in the Bible but also in our Christian circles, that has failed in this. So we have to be very careful about these two kinds of attitude. Okay, so let us begin with the test. No, in verse 1 and 2, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now, just imagine lang nga Isaac was born out of a miracle. Sarah was barren, and then miraculously she conceived with Isaac. And then Isaac was born, and he grew up. This age siguro is between 13 to 20 years old na si Isaac, no? And Sarah is already quite old that she could no longer conceive again. And God said to Abraham, offer him as a sacrifice. Now, if you examine the situation of Abraham, this is a struggle actually. Probably he was given this command at around morning or in the afternoon. And just imagine the kind of struggle and the mental agony that he has experienced throughout the night. No, the command is a seeming contradiction, right? There was a promise nga his seed will be as stars of the heaven, and then wala na siya laing option because Ishmael is already out. God said explicitly here, your only son, isa na lang yun ang nabilin. So Isaac is now the only son, and siguro he could say nga, yeah, I could sacrifice Isaac and then I could have another son and name him Isaac again. Because ingon man si God nga through Isaac your seed will be the nations will be blessed. So he can just sacrifice Isaac, and then Sarah could conceive again and name him Isaac the second. But it's not possible anymore. Why? Sarah is already very old. Abraham is already very old. And there's no way that she can conceive again and have another son. So another thing that Abraham seems to struggle is kana bang the idea ba nga absurd ba kay nga command hatag bawi man ni imo kung gitagaan og promise that my seed will be multiplied as the sand of the shore, the stars of heaven, yet imong gibawi kay imong kuhaon ang ako ang promised seed. So there is this struggle that Abraham actually has in his mind. And I guess this is the reason nga probably he was not able to sleep. That's why he rose early in the morning. But this is also something that he knows that he has to make decision. Right? There are situations in our life nga we need to make a decision even if there is a struggle that is accompanied by it. And this is related in so many areas at our lives. One of that for most of us good NCC is a young church, is the choice of a spouse, right? Whenever there's a potential for a person to fulfill that desire to have a spouse or a partner, there's that struggle if there is some sort of a decision that you have to make, because something is not right, or dili gid siya mo match with God's demand and also God's promise. Okay. So, let us say for example, one of the things nga mahitabo siguro is the area of unequal yoking. No, for many Christians, I'm also speaking to the Christian churches that are not here, no, in other churches in other parts of this place. No, they have a relationship, but later on I realized that the other party is not really a believer. And this is a test of faith that the person, especially the believer, has to resolve. And that decision actually carries a lot of consequences either to the left or to the right, whatever kind of decision he or she is doing. So, ang rational ana is, I may not get married kay I'm getting older. If I will give up my current relationship, saan naman lang. No? If I will wait for a committed believer as a spouse, basig din niya moabot. Dili man ko pareha sa uban nga sana all. No? So that's the struggle. And I believe Abraham recognized this, but at the same time, he also recognized that the God who made the promise and also gave the command is the one who knows everything. No, one of the truths that he would have realize is that the God who gives the blessing to mankind is also entitled to demand it back from mankind. And one of the best examples that we can see it from the Bible is the life of Job. No, Job was very rich, but suddenly he became so poor, and not only poor but sick. So one question that we need to the implication of this command ba is a question that many Christians are also asking, and even atheists. Is God contradicting his character by demanding a human sacrifice? Because this is the first command. This is the first thing stated in the Bible that God actually said, give me a human sacrifice. So this is something that is also a weapon that they use against Christianity, that God is a terror God or he's a tyrant. He's just a pleasure wreck nga could just demand anything, and then evil and so on and so forth. But there's something that we need to also see here. One is that he owns everything, including our lives, and he can do whatever he pleases, right? Another thing is that he can end a man's life as a just payment for sin, including the method such as human sacrifice. But he did not. No? He can do that because we all know that man is fallen, and Isaac is a fallen man, and he can exact justice at the right at that time, and he can choose the method that he can use. But he did not. Third, he does not have to extend a sinner's life, but he does. Next, he is not obligated to bless us, but he did. Next, he does not have to show mercy towards rebellious sinners, but he did. And lastly, in theological hindsight, God knows he will intervene to carry out his redemptive plan. So, there's no way that you can say, what are you doing to God? Because as a God who is just, he knows that even if he would demand life from Isaac, he is justified in doing so. Why? Because Isaac is not holy, so to speak. He is not sinless. His sin is actually enough, or is just for God to demand life back as a justice to his holiness. So the struggle continues, no? And there only the only possible way out is for him later on to realize that if God is powerful, then he can do something in order to fulfill his promise still. No? And then there is that kinamurag light bulb moment. Hey, if God can take out life, he can also make life appear again. And that prompted him to make a decision because he evaluated the consequences if he would disobey. There will be no more, probably God would do something else if he doesn't obey. But if he obeys, he doesn't know with full certainty nga ang iyang ang promise hadayon. But there is that careful evaluation that if God is true, he would do everything in order to fulfill his promise, and that promise is gaining more weight and value in the eyes of Abraham rather than the other else nga mahitabo in the future. So the character of God is more valuable than the perceived loss. The losses would be quite heavy, but the character of God in the eyes of Abraham at the time when he had that light bulb moment is that he can take out life, but he can give life again. So Abraham made a decision, and he also recognized that there are consequences of that decisions that he made in the future. And that is also something that is true to us, no? Are we prepared ba nga for a test of faith when things or people dear to us will be taken away? No? One of that is, like for example, atong career or business, atong valued possessions. What about physical beauty? If mawala atong physical beauty, do we still decide on things like following God and everything else? Or worse, loved ones will be taken out from us? It will happen, good. It will happen. Not this time, but in the future. And lastly, if we are persecuted by our relatives because of our faith in God, do we still decide to continue following Him and actually go through the test of faith? So, what happened was that in verse 3 and 4, Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Now, the key here is the word rose early. He probably did not sleep at that night, yod. Or he could have slept, but more pareha sa uban bang makamatalan dayon sayo because of the struggle that the man has the night before. But rose early is a key word to describe that Abraham has already made a decision. It is what we call as the action of Abraham's faith. He rose early, meaning he did not hesitate. He did not kinang flip-flop in his decision making, and he made a decision by rising up early in the morning. And not only that, he took people and his son, prepared for the sacrifice, and then made a journey for 2 days to that mountain in order to obey God's command. So he has an action of his faith, or your faith action. So if God would ask you something, unsa may atong faith action, do we rose early just like what Abraham did? If God would say, give up your baby sins, what would you do? If there are idols in your heart, God knows that this one could wreak havoc on your faith later on. For us, we are so comfortable in our daily lives, karon, no? Even if na pandemic, we're still very comfortable. But are we ready to take action when God says, hey, these things are already competing with your devotions? What about your spiritual disciplines? There are things that are competing with our devotion right now. A lot. Pag yun na. But when God demanded things, when He said, do this, do that, what's your action of your faith? And lastly, if there are ungodly relationships that not only you, but those people that are hearing this, what is your action of faith, or your faith action? So verse 5 to 8, it says there, Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took his hand, the fire, and the knife. So they went, both of them, together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them, together. Not only Abraham has action in his faith, but you can also see it in the language of his faith. When he was asked, manggod nga Father, asa naman ang sakripisyo? Without probably Isaac is so innocent. He did not know nga siya giday mahimo ang sacrifice, no? But out of his innocence, he asked a very pointed question towards his father and said, My father, where is the lamb? And Abraham actually said a very beautiful statement that says, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. In the King James Version, it's translated this way: God will provide himself for a lamb offering for the sacrifice, which is something that is actually true when you look at the cross. It was God who provided himself as a lamb for the burnt offering. So we can see that the action of Abraham's faith is accompanied also by the language of Abraham's faith. When somebody is curious why you do a certain act, like rising early, how do you express it verbally? No, how do you respond to people when they ask you the actions that you do in relation to your faith? No. So let's say, for example, how will you respond when you refuse to go out with your friends, classmates, or workmates to an activity that will lead you to sin? You have decided not to go with them. You have decided you have to stay home. You decided that you would go to the Bible study. And you would say nga, ato ko Bible study. Why? Mayon sila, why? Thus, your action of faith also accompanied by the language of your faith. Just like Abraham did, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. What will you say when you decide to let offense slide and allow others to defraud you? Klaro na ginakasala, klaro na defrauded ka. You were at a disadvantaged stage. Yet, for some reason, you let it slide. You let it pass, and people would ask you, "Why are you doing that, bro? Why did you allow that person to trample on you?" What language of faith are you going to say to them? And this is very important because actions and language or words should go together. Like for example, nganong dili naman kamo inom bay? Instead of saying, I believe in God, masakit magod akong tiyan. No? You know that is partly true. But you also know that one of the major reasons is that you want to obey God. So the language is also very important, not just the action. So he says that God will provide. And those things that Abraham did is being validated by the words that he has said to his son. No, so the things that we can learn from this is that actions are best understood by the reasons behind those actions. Number 2, acts of faith are best comprehended by the language of faith, and the faith actions that we make are the easiest path for us to promote Christ with our language. Because he believes nga God will raise him up from the dead, Isaac. And we can see this in Hebrews 11 that says that by faith Abraham obeyed because he believes that God will raise Isaac back from the dead. Verse 6, And Abraham took the burnt offering and laid it to his son Isaac, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, so went both of them together. So Isaac now was the one carrying the wood. He was traveling to the mountain in order to be sacrificed, and he went there on the third day. Does it sound so familiar? No? Was there somebody again in the New Testament that carries the wood and went there in the mountain, and then on the third day he was back? So Isaac and Jesus are two characters that we can see as something that God did in order to fulfill His promise to save mankind. No, they are both only son. They carried the wood. They were offered as a sacrifice, and then they came back to life on the third day. So we can see here that in this narrative there is already this gospel that we can see as very evident, and something that God gave us as early pa lang sa Genesis pa lang, that there is this plan that as Isaac would be spared from death, and then a substitute will be laid in his stead. For us, there is also that thing that God will spare us from death, and then somebody will substitute us as a sacrifice for our sin. Then there's the intervention, verse 9 to 14. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So, in summary, Abraham passed the test. God knows that He will intervene in order to fulfill His promise, regardless whether Abraham or would do something else. No, but in hindsight, there's this theological and theological truth that we have to absorb, that God has a redemptive plan, and He will accomplish everything according to His plan, and He wants people to be involved in that plan of salvation. So the character of God is also revealed here. No, God, yes, there are times nga we can say nga God's demands are so difficult yun. Nga murag absurd kay siya. There are things that we can say nga hatagbawi man ni Lord. No, there are things that we say dili man nako ni kayag yun on my own. But this passage, this text actually reveals that the God who gives demands is also the God who will also provide for those demands. That's why He was called Jehovah Jireh, or the God will provide. And then in verse 15 to 18, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Okay, so there are two things that we can see here. Ang promise day ni God, di ba unconditional man to? Nga nung naingon man po siya nga, I will bless you because you obeyed me. Isn't that something contradictory? At surface, you may say, yes. But the promised blessing at the first is unconditional and based on God's love. There were no conditions that were laid out when God said to Abraham nga, in your seed I will bless the nations of the earth. Wala siya promise. So, promised blessing was unconditional and based on God's love, but there are times that it is also the same, that same promise, it was also a response to a man's act of faith. Diba? In our regeneration and our kinang salvation, it was He who initiated and it was He who did everything. But somewhere along the New Testament passages, it says that those who persevere to the end will be saved. So it is some sort of a mystery, no? Nga if we look at our salvation ba, God initiates regeneration, but He also responds to our working out of our salvation. So He does the justification moment of our kinang salvation, but in sanctification, He also requires and demands us to respond in ways in order for that justification to go through until its end. And it also relates to our prayer. God is gracious and knows what we need before we ask. He also responds through our act of faith through prayer. It is mysterious. I would say it is quite mysterious, but at the same time very comforting. Especially when you are at the end of your rope. No? In business, daghan kay nahitabo, no? Wala na kay panggasto sa imong kuan, sa imong expenses at the end of the month, wala na kay kuan. In your trading perhaps, no? You're already losing your money, and then you prayed nga, God, kanina lang yun, and then you don't know kay wala nagi kay way on how to go through things, and then suddenly just a snap of a finger, something happened, and God responded to you through your prayer. It's very mysterious, yet very comforting also. He knows that you will need this, yet He also requires us to pray for this. There was one time nga nahitabo ba nga a person who came from a place landed in the pier in Cebu, and then when he is going back home na, wala gid siya makuha nga sakyanan because puno kayong mga PUJ. The taxis are also full because that was the time nga puno ang moy pangpanggawas sa mga tao sa pier, and there's no way for him to go home at that time, and he wants to go there and go home and then rest, but no vehicle available for him. So he was already quite distressed na. What shall he do? The logical thing was to pray, God, I want to go home. Please send somebody that I could go home. Less than 1 minute, a private car approach and then stop. Boss, asa ka? Talamban ko bay. Ato po ko padulong, sakay lang. But we say nga, God, thank you. But at the same time, we also know nga God already knows that before that thing happened. So there are two kinds of offspring that was implied here in verse 15 to 18. No, there was the plural, which to represent the physical nation that will inherit the physical promises, and then there's also the singular, which we say that it represents the holy nation that will inherit the spiritual promises. This is the offspring that says, "And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies." What is the enemy here? No, in Genesis 3:15, it was there as the promise nga he will trample the feet of the serpent, and if we look at the New Testament, that enemy is actually death, or the devil that pulls us in order for us to die in our spiritual sin. So let's go on, verse 20 to 24. Now all after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kimuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jedlaf, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. Seems boring kaysa genealogy ba? Why is this nga naa pa man niya diri? For us it's quite boring, but for them it's very important because it gives us a preview of the next episode in the life of Abraham. Kung sa Korean novela pa ni nahuman ang isa ka episode pero naay gi-show nila this is what happened next. And this is a preview of the things that will occur later on as part of God's redemptive plan for mankind through Abraham. It is an introduction of Rebekah in God's story of redemption. So this is something that we will go next in the next chapter. So how do we apply this? No, we all know that God tested Abraham's faith. For what reason, man? Why did God go through this trouble of testing Abraham's faith? Number one, probably to prove our faith. To prove our faith not to Himself but to ourselves. No? Kaya ba naman si God your faith is okay. But there are times nga ikaw wala ka kabalo nga your faith is okay. That is why it needs to be tested. Number two is to validate him as the father of all to Abraham. To validate him as the father of all who have faith in God. Like father, like son. If the father is tested, so are the descendants. So if Abraham as the father of faith is tested, all of his descendants are also tested in their faith. It is also an example of absolute obedience. When the situation does not make sense, the only thing that makes sense is to believe. Next is to provide or to reveal God's character as our provider. When God is testing our faith, that's also a moment for us to say, to believe, and to recognize that if He tested us, He will also provide for us. It is also a foreshadow of the God's sacrifice of His only son. We all know that that Isaac is the only son. Isaac is carrying the wood. Isaac will be sacrificed. Yet God also intervened. Instead of us, now we are supposed to carry our wood. We are supposed to be offered as a sacrifice, as just payment for sin. It is supposed for us to go through that journey towards justice, yet God did not do that. And that test is something that He showed to us na kini He has a better plan for mankind. Next is that this passage gives us the idea or gives us the thought that we will have our journey of faith from the time that we repent of our and also trust in God. No, one of the journey that we will encounter is that the failure of our faith. Taganakay ni siya so many times na nahitabo. There's also that testing of our faith. God knows nga there are times nga we neglect our faith. There are times that we don't value our faith. There are also times that we are not sure if we really have faith, and those are the times that God will test our faith. And one of the journey also of our faith is that the response to the test, the action that we will rose early moment of our faith. And then it is accompanied by the language of our faith. I did this because. Why are you doing this? I did that because. Why are you like that? I am like this because. You continue that statement. Profession of faith is validated by the acts of faith. No? Tests are indicators of a person's commitment to God. It follows and accompanies a believer's spiritual journey. Another lesson that we can learn from this text, from this passage, is that all believers will be tested. No? Again, let's avoid lang two kinang attitudes lang. Don't dismiss it. Dili jud ka testingan on the things that you are the most, the weakest. And don't also be presumptive. That spiritual pride that says, "Come on, let it come. I will survive it." dili man ta pareha atong I will survive, no? You may, but because of your pride, you may not. And one of the kinang glaring examples of that is the life of Peter. I will never deny you. And what happened was 3 times pagyod nahitabo. Right? So, in what ways bangyod matested atong faith? What are the situations wherein the faith of a believer is tested? Number 1 is through God's demands. No, there are so many things that that God demands from us. Yet there are moments when we say nga lisod man kayo i-obey. Nganong kinahanglan man gyud, no? When God says, "Do not forsake assembly," mayon ka nga, Lord, risky man na may virus. But still God says, "Do not forsake assembly." Do not forsake assembly. But you will say, God, 99% raman ang survival. I want 100%. But still God says, do not forsake assembly. That is a significant test of your faith, right? Because the risk of your health is now being put in comparison with the command of God to not forsake meeting at the church. I assume that you heard the story of a Chinese church, that early covenant rain, but early rain. They know that when they assemble as a church, they will get arrested, get imprisoned, even to the point of death. But why are they keep on assembling? Why are they keep on going to the church? Because of the command, do not forsake assembly. Is it safe? No. It is even more dangerous than our situations here. But do you only obey God when you are certain that you are 100% safe? Or you see the risks, but you gain more, and you value God's character and God's command in saying, yes, I will obey, even if it is risky. So God tests our faith through His demands. He will also test our faith in our difficulties, in our afflictions pa, sa atong struggles, sa atong work. Are there situations in our work that it somehow forces us to say words that we will regret later, or to do actions that when caught will really compromise our Christian witness? In your relationships, kung i-rejected ba ka sa iyong family, sa imong pag-witness, do you kinang crow and then stay on the side? Afflictions actually are what we call as, it is the dress you wear when you become a believer. We wear that in our spiritual journey. Tests also converts our weak faith into a strong faith. If you don't go through the test, you will never know how strong you are. Just like metals ba? Metals get hard and very strong when they are forged with heat and fire. If they are not subjected to the fire, they cannot get hard. They cannot be kinang strong against rust and against those kinang mga forces that will be kinang given to them. And this is a very old saying na nga kinang smooth seas doesn't make good sailors. And even let us say kinang smooth skies doesn't make you a good pilot. So tests are very important, and through difficulties, God will show us the quality of our faith through these tests. Another kinang way wherein God will test us is through our provisions. When we have money, when we are comfortable in our situations, that can be a test of our faith, because the comfort can somehow or sometimes compete na with our commitment, with our kinang faith in God, no? Pwede ba ka mag-Bible study? Kapoy mo I like to play games, man God, and rest and play games at night, so I don't have the time na. So you value more your comfort rather than obeying God, no, in those things. I'm not saying that that games are bad, or having comfortable seasons in your day is bad. It's just that if those things are put to the test and there are situations that you have to choose between the two, which one would you do? Also, our faith is tested through delays, no? Patience in waiting for our partners, no? Kanang kuan naman, kanang hapit na kumulapas kalendaryo. So, if na mo abot na, grabe ang test ana niya. In the business, no? Many kinang aspiring businessman right now wants to be successful. But in doing so, if they will follow the right way, delays and those mga bureaucracies can actually give them so much hard times that they will be tested whether they will still go through and do things religiously, or make some compromise or shortcut the system. This will also test our perseverance, no? And one of the things that are quite true with regards to our society right now, even to the Christian church, is that we are no longer training our people to be kinang resilient or to be persevering. You notice on say latest nga bill karon is that to kinang prohibit contact sports among children. Contact sports, taekwondo, kanang mga MMA. Children would no longer be allowed to do that or to engage in that. Because we want to protect the kids. But in doing so, we are training them to be weak and to be kinang fragile, so that when trials and testings in their life would come, they will not persevere and they will easily give up. God forbid that will happen in our church. We would like our members, the people here, to know nga this will come, trials, but it is also very important for us to go through the trials, because one of the result of that is that we will be coming out as strong, and something that will make us go through another trials in our lives and persevere us in our faith. Lastly, things that we can learn from this is that true believers will ultimately pass the test. That is based on unconditional promise of God's love. He knows that he will intervene in the life of Abraham. Abraham did not know that. God will intervene in the trials of our life. We will never know that. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, in the grand narrative of his redemptive plan, He will allow us to go through, but ultimately we will pass the test. We have a forerunner with that. He already overcome death. He will come again and allow us to overcome once more the death. So He will hold us fast, and it is something that again, we have to be very careful. We don't have to be we should not be kinang presumptive in these things and then say nga kaya lagi na ko na, because it is not us. It is Christ in us. Amen. So let us pray.